Greetings, everybody. So this here is me doing a fire animation study. So I learned how to animate fire in a few different forms to really get an understanding of how that effect works. So here I'm starting with the most simple, which is a single flame that you would see like on a candle or something, and practicing the swaying effect and whatnot. So you could have seen that there was first a ball to kind of help keep the idea of the mass of the flame so it doesn't start like morphing and whatnot, and then also the line, or like I like to see it as like a grass animation of like the swaying and whatnot to help show the movement of the flame and whatnot. And then of course here I'm coloring the flame. This one was the simplest, so there's not a lot to talk about. Here I'm starting on another form of fire animation where you have 3 balls that will kind of float up and gradually get smaller and then repeat. So you have the larger ball forming at the bottom and then it shrinks as it goes up. This is kind of like a more liquidy form of fire because it flows a little differently because it kind of looks like it's just bubbling up instead of swaying and or like breaking off pieces of flame and whatnot. And then another thing with this is that it was kind of hard to animate this without having it mirrored on one side with the little bits and pieces. And here I'm making the insides, kind of following these circles a bit more tighter than the outside, so that I can really show the kind of like wave it's creating with these circles. I also used kind of like a guideline at the top to show roughly where the circles would stop and whatnot, so it doesn't like continuously keep getting taller and taller. And then here I'm once again, after erasing all those guidelines, I am now coloring it in and whatnot. For this type of animation, I wanted to really show kind of like the breakdown of how I made this. So it would have started off with the rough sketch of how I made it move, and then the outline, and then the coloring, and like all the polished, so that in future, if I ever needed to, I could come back to it and show myself my process of how I did it. I think whenever I do animate fire, looking at references would definitely be a lot better, because all of this was kind of winging it. So, all the like the spikes and everything were kind of coming out from imagination and whatnot. Here, I believe I am putting two of those together. So not only do I have the wave, but I am also having the ball go up and whatnot, so that I can try and make the fire more fire-like, having it sway back and forth, as well as growing and shrinking in size. Or I guess when animating fire, the squish and stretch is kind of what is happening with it. So you can see it gets really thin, and then it'll come back down and like grow, and then it'll like squeeze back up and whatnot. And you can have very violent fires and whatnot. So here I wanted to kind of express the breaking off of fire. So I would have the way the fire come up and have a ball break off of it, which would shrink, showing the particles like disintegrating, disappearing, that kind of a thing. And I definitely gave this one a lot more spikies. Which definitely gave it more of that sporadic look of like the fire is like very fast and always moving. Here I'm just constantly cleaning it up, because I would draw like the general shape of it and then do the inside. So I would clean it up and whatnot. Here in the inside, you could see I'm starting to like slowly push off another ball, so I'm making it look like it's almost exploding out of the center of the fire. So I'll have the inside, the hottest part of the flame, kind of wrap around the ball until it kind of like breaks out on the side of the fire, showing that it's almost like, I don't know, like bursting out or something of just so much energy. And this is where I kind of start to have the ball have its own like source of hot energy in the center, because it's kind of forming on the outside of the flame at this point. So it is now at the point where it separates. So I have it now on the outside of the flame, and kind of like almost like this big gaping hole from the tail of the flame that shows that it's finally separate. As you can see now, I'm doing the coloring and the cleanup of it. For some reason, I use orange to express the darker shade of the fire, even though later I made it more of like an orangish red, which made it look more like fire. And then I did a more darker yellow for the inside, so I just kind of made the flame darker later. Here I was doing a new form of coloring, so I would have a clipping mask on top of the coloring for the orange part of the fire, and then the inside would be on a separate layer above the clipping mask so it wouldn't affect it, and I would make the edges darker and the insides warmer by kind of using an airbrush, and kind of just, you know, lightly dust the outsides and the inside to give it a nice gradient, which really looked nice. Here was another way of making a flame, and to really use the squash and stretch idea with the flame. So as you can see, up above there's a line and then a figure 8, or I guess just an 8 above it. Well, the line cuts off where the flame is, and the figure 8 kind of shows a pathway of the particles that exit from the flame. So, and whenever it gets lower, it will kind of like widen out and kind of squash, basically. And then it will come back up and it will get thinner, and then it will just break off and come back down again. So this was another like fire form, which I really liked. It really helped me understand the kind of idea of how fire moves. This form, this like circular form I'm doing, is like a whoosh of fire to almost look like a loading screen, basically, but with fire. And this I actually enjoyed a lot. So as you can see, I had a circle drawn out first, and then this gray form, which was to show where the fire's gonna be, so it'll like stretch and like speed up, and then it'll slow down and like squish back down, like it lost a lot of its momentum right back where it started, so it can have a continuous loop. So then you can see here, I did the line art real quick of just like super spiky, stretchy stuff. I don't think it quite looks like fire, but I can assure you it is. I kind of skipped a few steps because it's honestly been so long since I came back to this fire animation to finish and whatnot. So I had skipped a few steps, which I later came back to after I colored it and realized it's missing a lot. So you can see here, I'm adding a lot of breaking off flames from its original mass, because you know it's shrinking, so it can't just like suddenly shrink. I feel like it needs to break off flames and whatnot to make it look like it's actually losing its energy, I guess. And then here I am adding the inside flame, and then there are times when I have the inside touching parts of the wall as it like moves really fast and whatnot. And then you can see I did use a little bit darker colors for this one, which I really liked. Still using the same technique of having the reddish orange on one layer and then the yellow on a separate layer, and then having like the clipping mask over the orangish red so that I can do a nice fade of the color, make it a nice gradient. Because that's one thing about fire, is that it has a lot of different shades, even though it can simply just be two colors. There's a lot of detail in the simplest form of just fire and whatnot. And you can see here I'm doing a slightly different technique. Instead of just having the brighter color inside of it, kind of warmed up, I have it at the face of it, and then having the darker color on the outside to making it look like it's cooling down towards the tail of the fire. This one, the sword, was simply because I've watched a lot of Demon Slayer, and I was like, I gotta make something where a sword, and then it like creates a lot of energy and just combusts into flames. So as you can see, I made an arch and some timing. That's what those dashes were. And then I drew a sword and then kind of angled it down as it goes. And then of course the gray was to kind of show the movement of the fire. So I wanted it to kind of spread down the blade as it grew and whatnot. Like it would start at the tip and then it would just grow on the sword. So you can see here I'm constantly making sure that the flame is breaking off as it settles down and gets to its end point, so it doesn't look like it just went away again, making it look like it kind of like fire, where it breaks away. And going back and constantly testing it to make sure it looks good. And this was also another favorite. I would say the circle was one of my favorites because it came out very nice, as well as the sword. And that is it. Thank you for watching.